Welcome everyone to the virtual event on harnessing accountability through external public audits. I'm organized jointly by the International Budget Partnership, the INTOSAI Development Initiative, and the World Bank. My name is Claire Schouten, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. This discussion will be held in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic with simultaneous interpretation. So for interpretation on your Zoom control bar located at the bottom right hand of your screen, you can click interpretation and choose the desired language. And to only hear the interpreted language, you can click mute original audio. And I would like to invite all participants to engage in this lively discussion by sharing questions or comments and experiences through the chat box. And we'd like to draw on these questions during the discussion in today's session. So we are here today to discuss the findings and implications of a new report, All Hands on Deck, Harnessing Accountability Through External Public Audits, which examines national oversight systems and offers recommendations on how to strengthen accountability through public audits. This discussion comes at a time when supreme audit institutions are under enormous pressure to ensure that governments are effective stewards of COVID-19 emergency spending in ways that advance the public interest. Confronting the health effects and the economic upheaval of COVID-19 has required massive money flows, estimated at a staggering $12 trillion globally, as well as speedy decisions on government spending. Now, these investments are, of course, essential, but they also pose unique challenges for public auditors to provide proper oversight. We know that many countries still suffer from long-standing obstacles that ultimately impede oversight, just as we need to ensure that vulnerable groups and pandemic-related relief reaches those who need it most. So let's get all hands on deck. We will first hear a presentation of the report findings and recommendations from Vivek Ramkumar, Senior Director of Policy at the International Budget Partnership. We will then hear from a panel of distinguished speakers, and I'll introduce them shortly. So we welcome all participants again to use the chat, introduce yourselves, your name, your organization, your country. We'd love to hear from you. And now I'll pass over to Vivek. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire, and hello, everyone. I'm honored to have this opportunity to present our new report, All Hands on Deck, Harnessing Accountability Through External Public Audits, that the International Budget Partnership and the INTOSAI Development Initiative published last week. As Claire mentioned in her welcome remarks, so many lives have been upended this year by the overwhelming health and economic impacts of COVID. The good news is that governments have stepped up and made major spending commitments to shore up their battered economies and to provide direct relief to their populations. In fact, the International Monetary Fund estimates that countries have already announced nearly $12 trillion in emergency spending measures. However, the measures announced by many governments often followed expedited processes and did not receive the same level of scrutiny annual national budgets do. As a result, a key challenge that countries are now confronting is to ensure that emergency funds actually contribute to recovery and reach intended beneficiaries. This is a serious concern as cases of misuse and mismanagement of COVID funds have been reported on every continent. Strong oversight of the public budget is a priority even in non-emergency times, and supreme audit institutions have a lead role in providing such oversight. But it is increasingly clear that for their work to deliver impact, the support and collaboration of an ecosystem of interconnected actors, conditions, and processes is needed. Next slide, please. Such an ecosystem should include at least 6 integral components. First, an institutional framework or mandate is needed to ensure public auditors are truly independent and have the resources to do their job. Second, auditors must produce high-quality audit reports that cover essential programs and are accessible to the public. Third, effective legislative oversight is required to respond to audit reports in a timely manner. Fourth, executives must address audit findings and act on audit recommendations. Fifth, there must be independent follow-up, usually by the audit office or the legislature, to assess whether recommendations were effectively implemented. And sixth, the public, including civil society organizations, the media, and citizens, must have the opportunity to engage, influence, and bolster the entire audit and oversight process. Our new report uses data from IBP's most recent open budget survey to assess the strength and adequacy of these 6 components of oversight across 117 countries. The survey data is converted into scores ranging from 0 to 100 that enable comparisons across countries and each of the 6 components of the oversight ecosystem. Although the data were compiled before the onset of COVID-19, our report details the state of oversight systems and practices in place as countries began confronting the crisis. Next slide, please. There are 3 key findings from our report that I share with you. First, most countries and all regions of the world, as defined by the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions, suffer from weak or inadequate oversight systems. The average score for the 117 countries surveyed is only 37 out of 100. This is well below the threshold score of more than 60 that we use as a benchmark for assessing oversight systems as adequate. Generally, regions with more advanced economies receive higher average scores than others, but no region as a group is performing at the level of internationally accepted norms for audit and oversight. The weaknesses are most prevalent among countries in the Arab and Francophone African regions. Next slide, please. A second key finding is that countries generally have supreme audit institutions that are able to operate independently and with adequate resources. On this measure, countries receive a global average score of 76 out of 100, which makes this the only component scoring above 60, which again is the threshold for adequacy. Yet, while this component is seemingly strong overall, the average score conceals some worrying issues. Recent experience has shown, despite seemingly robust legal provisions, de facto independence may still be curtailed as powerful actors find ways to threaten and undermine the independence of audit institutions. For example, in several countries, including most recently and notably in Ghana, the fixed terms granted to SAI heads to enable them to discharge their duties have been undermined by regulations on retirement ages. Thus, some SAI heads who had been appointed to a term allowing them to continue beyond the retirement age have been abruptly dismissed at short notice, contrary to constitutional provisions for removal. The timing of dismissal often seems opportunistic in relation to critical audit reports. The third main finding in our report highlights the 2 weakest components of the oversight ecosystem. The global average score received by 117 countries on indicators assessing opportunities for public engagement in audit and oversight processes is a dismal 16 out of 100. What this implies is that many SAIs and legislative oversight committees are closing the door to public scrutiny of executed budgets and audit reports. This is a self-defeating mistake, as civil society organizations, the media, and the broader public can be critical allies for bolstering oversight at a time when powerful executives are running roughshod over institutions that are meant to check their actions. It is therefore unsurprising that our report also finds that the weakest component of oversight is on executive responses to audit findings, which receives a global average score of 13 out of 100. The abysmal performance of countries on the executive's response to audit findings applies to low, middle, and high-income countries alike. Next slide, please. Ineffectiveness of the audit and oversight ecosystem as a whole is especially troubling as it comes at a time when we need effective public auditors. Now more than ever, countries need to invest in oversight institutions and build rather than undermine their capacity. We hope that our report can serve as a wake-up call to all stakeholders to take immediate steps to preserve the independence of SAIs, enhance public engagement in audit and oversight processes, and improve the review and follow-up on audit reports. These are achievable objectives, especially if there is shared responsibility among key stakeholders to achieve them. In this context, we urge SAIs to make every effort to publish their audit findings in a timely and accessible manner, and to create meaningful and inclusive mechanisms for civic engagement. This could be achieved by working with civil society groups to improve audit targeting, expand coverage, and enhance capacity. Legislatures should proactively review and follow up on audit reports and hold public hearings in which they seek testimony from SAIs and relevant members of the public. They should also initiate processes to ensure that SAIs have the mandate, independence, and resources to conduct and publish relevant high-quality audits on the use of emergency funds. Civil society organizations should follow the example of their counterparts in Ghana and champion the independence of SAIs and call out governments when audit independence is threatened. They should also engage with SAIs in dialogue on priority and high-risk areas for audit, promote the visibility of audit reports and recommendations, and track and advocate for executive follow-up. Donors should explore opportunities for cross-sectoral support to all institutions that form the audit and oversight ecosystem, and push back when the independence of SAIs in partner countries is threatened. And finally, executives should direct audited public organizations to make all information available to auditors and to heed and take appropriate action on audit findings. Senior officials should make clear that the audit findings must be taken seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vivek. And indeed, that was a wake-up call. We have some challenges and some opportunities to address, and we're very excited to hear from the speakers today, as well as our active audience here. We have more than 230 people with us today from around the world, so we're very excited to hear about the questions and comments and experiences that everyone here today would like to share. So we now like to turn to our distinguished panel of speakers. I'm pleased to introduce I'll introduce everyone and then we'll get to the questions. So I'm delighted to introduce Edward Olo-Okere, who's the director of the Global Governance Practice at the World Bank. Delighted to have you with us. We'll also hear from Pamela Monroe Ellis, who's the Auditor General of Jamaica and Secretary General for the Caribbean Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. And we're excited to hear about her experience with real-time audits of COVID-19 funds and programs as well. We're delighted to have Hannu Takula, member of the European Court of Auditors and former member of the European Parliament and Parliament of Finland. So we have indeed a unique legislative perspective there as well. We'll also hear from Dr. Hector Frelich, who's the former coordinator of the National Chagas program of the Ministry of Health in Argentina. And there we've heard some interesting developments on Chagas in Argentina. So we're looking forward to hearing about executive action and how we can prompt more action on audits. We're also delighted to hear from Jay Cruz, who's the director of the Public Service Accountability Monitor at Rhodes University in South Africa. Again, rich experience on using and promoting audits. And finally, we'll hear a synthesis and closing remarks from Einar Gorason, who's the Director General of the INTOSAI Development Initiative, again, one of the co-host organizations. So very excited to hear from you all. So first I'll turn to Ed for the kickoff of the questions and answers. So Ed, looking at you, the report highlights the interconnectedness of actors in the accountability ecosystem. Of course, these actors include Supreme Audit institutions, legislatures, civil society, and of course, the executive. So how can we strengthen greater engagement between these actors? And in particular, I'll add to that. If we think about Supreme Audit institutions, sometimes they're worried that engagement with civil society may compromise their impartiality and their objectivity. So what can be done to foster greater trust between Supreme Audit institutions and civil society? So Ed, over to you, please.
Okay, good morning. ¿Me escuchan?
Oh, sorry. We do, Dr. Hector. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
Yes, we'll pass over to Ed. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Claire. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are in the world. I would like to begin by congratulating the International Budget Partnership and INTOSAI Donor Initiative for collaborating to prepare a global report on public audits using the open budget data. Historically, as we know, public audits by Supreme Audit institutions have been seen as a fault-finding exercise, focusing on violations, mistakes, and irregularities through compliance and financial audits. These audits are nevertheless important for public accountability and legitimacy of governments. However, with the emergence of performance audits and reorientation of Supreme Audit institutions' focus, the contributions of SAIs have expanded and are much more critical in development process. The IBP IDI report is perhaps the first major attempt to link open budget data with SAI work, and this is very important. The report also set the right tone in presenting accountability ecosystem with several players interacting with each other. And you all had the recommendations made in the report, which Vivek nicely summarized. They are right on the mark. Now, to the question of how do we strengthen engagement between the actors? Let me speak of 4 areas of such opportunities. First, SAIs are rightly regarded as the most significant accountability institutions, but they are not the only ones. Anti-corruption agencies, procurement authorities, internal audits, and other agencies play complementary roles to SAI. While the focus and approach may be different, often all control agencies work on similar issues, drawing on similar data and information. The key control agencies can therefore share data and findings and align their annual work plans so they better complement each other. The World Bank, for example, recently facilitated such an approach with the South Asia Accountability Conference in Bangladesh, where Anti-Corruption Agency, Parliament, and SAI established protocols to enhance exchange of data and findings. SAI can lead in establishing such a platform in each country. Another area is SAI and legislators. They have formal established mechanisms whereby the reports of SAIs are considered by the Public Accounts Committee. Often this is complicated by the increasing number of audit reports produced by SAIs which have not yet been considered by PAC, and the limitation on time and expertise of Public Accounts Committee members. I mean, these are politicians, and so they are not able to really deal with the reports promptly. So SAIs needs to scale up their efforts to support Public Accounts Committees, considering they are seen in many countries as a friend, philosopher, and guide to Public Accounts Committee. And you will see in countries where there are systematic ways for the for the Supreme Audit Institution to support Public Accounts Committees, they tend to do better. Interventions may be needed to strengthen the capacity of both PACs and SAIs in some countries. For example, in Zimbabwe, considering the limited bandwidth of both the PAC and SAI, the World Bank supported the engagement of Public Accounts and Audit Board of the country to accelerate the PAC process. This resulted in not only a dramatic improvement in the number of recommendations on the audit reports considered by PAC, but also greater capacity in both the PAC and the SAI. A third area I would like to bring to the attention of participants is a huge untapped potential for greater collaboration between Supreme Audit institutions and civil society organizations. Participatory governance through association of Supreme Audit, through association of civil society organizations has long and well-established track of success. Examples include participation in budget processes, CSO's role in the campaign for sustainable development goals, for instance, SDG 3 on universal health coverage, involvement of CSOs and citizens in parliamentary proceedings, and so on. SAIs can build on these established practices. Several CSOs are well equipped to join hands with SAIs to collaborate in audits. These collaborations could lead to improved audit products, better selection of teams for audit, validation of results and findings with what the common man thinks will be the outcome of an audit, and could eventually enhance the credibility of SAI. And we also heard from the presentation made by FIFEC that where you have this collaboration between CSOs and the audit, they can also be instrumental in protecting the independence of the audit of the Supreme Audit Institution, as was rightly mentioned in the case of Ghana. Now, there is a question you ask about the limitations and issues with collaborating with CSO. I think let me address that later. First, and conclude this first part of my response. So the fourth area I would like to speak about is that SAI needs to collaborate better also with the executive. Often, SAIs are perceived as ivory towers, less willing to engage with Ministry of Finance and line ministries, except through audit queries and observations that they send to these agencies. The fears of risk to objectivity and independence are real. Nevertheless, while retaining objectivity, SAIs needs to reach out more proactively and interact with the executive on broader issues relating to public financial management reforms, sharing information on the IFMI system, implementation of new accounting system like IPSAS, Accrual, and so many other areas. The data analysis in the IBP IDI report highlighted a major issue that only 44% of countries have reasonably established SAI independence. This is worrisome, as independence is the foundation and the key factor which distinguishes SAI from other control agencies. It is also the fundamental building block for public accountability and transparency in any country. the World Bank has conducted an assessment of SAI independence in 118 countries through its country team to develop what we call a global SAI independence index. The index presents critical insights into global and regional trends on various factors that are affecting SAI independence. The work is done based on the Mexico Declaration and other standards on independence requirements. We plan to release a global report on SAI independence by middle of January 2020. And the plan is to update this annually. So please stay tuned on this. Now to why some SAIs may be worried that engagement with civil society may compromise their independence. Let me just highlight how some of the concerns, the concerns are real, but I think there are also reasonable ways to be able to address them. We all know, for instance, that civil society may request politically motivated audits, okay? Some of them may also be experiencing conflict of interest because of their political affiliations, okay? There may also be questions about whether civil society and citizens can rightly participate in audit assignment. Then there is also the possibility that if a SAI is not careful, they may be seen as resorting to sensationalism, okay, which is something that may not argue well for a well-respected institution. So these concerns need to be addressed. The best way to do this is to recognize the risk associated with each of these concerns and then develop ways to mitigate these risks. But in addition to these concerns also, we are all aware of fly-by-night CSOs, which exist more for profits and to accrue benefits from donors. So we need strong processes to also mitigate the risk of SAI falling prey to those. So, but in principle, SAI can involve civil society organizations at every stage of the audit process, okay? And starting from the audit planning, including audit execution and also the reporting stage. I know audit execution stage is the most contentious one. At the audit execution stage, for instance, the options could include use of CSOs as external advisors. SAIs could also solicit information from CSO to strengthen audit evidence, okay? While direct participation of CSO in audit may be uncommon, but some are success stories, and I would like to cite one. In the Philippines, for instance, SAI used the technique of conducting audits with CSO as members of SAI audit teams to make the government more effective, transparent, and accountable. The results were feasible. CSOs not only learned how public audits are undertaken, but also learned the constraints and challenges the government face in delivering public services to the people. State auditors also learned from the civil society organizations on their methods of research and data gathering, enhancing improved relationship. So for participatory audits to be successful, I would strongly recommend clear definitions regarding the scope of engagement, and the teams responsible for implementation is also something to be properly constituted. So legal aspects of participatory audit also need to be looked at in advance, because in some countries, this might be a challenge. Also, mainstreaming participation of civil society organization requires adequate planning through in detail steps and procedure. But I strongly would like to encourage this. And as Vivek was recommending in the presentation that he made, it's not just only about working with them on the reports and so on and so forth, but they could be involved upfront, and that will actually make their participation much more robust. So we really look forward to opportunities to support participatory governance in general and participatory audits by civil society organizations in particular in the countries that we work on. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks so much, Ed. And again, delightful to be co-hosting this event with you, the World Bank and the INTOSAI Development Initiative. Great points about the need for strong independent institutions. Of course, that applies to various accountability actors and how collaboration can enhance the audit and oversight ecosystem. And those are great points, great examples. There are more examples in the report. Thanks so much, Ed. And I see all the questions flowing in the chat. That's great. We're trying to answer some of those questions that are coming up as well in the chat. So this is great to keep the discussion going. We're excited about that. I'd now like to turn over to Mrs. Pamela Monroe Ellis, the Auditor General of Jamaica and Secretary General for the Caribbean Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. And we know, Mrs. Monroe Ellis, that the role of SAIs in ensuring transparency and accountability public funds is critical, especially during an emergency like the one we're going through in the current COVID pandemic. But we also know that governments are busy, they're distracted, understandably so, during emergencies. How receptive is the government to your work and auditing of COVID-19 programs? And how about other stakeholders? Would love to hear from you on that. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Good morning, all. Let me begin by congratulating the organizers of this global launch event. And let me also add that I am happy to be counted among the distinguished speakers participating in this webinar. So I am pleased to say that SAI Jamaica conducted a real-time audit of the government of Jamaica's COVID-19 relief package. This real-time audit was undertaken on the request of the Minister of Finance, who wanted to be assured that all criteria had been met before payments were made. So my quick answer to your question is that the government of Jamaica was receptive to the audit which was undertaken. And I will also add that the Minister of Finance's support during the process was key to SAI Jamaica completing the audit within the agreed time frame. So included in the due diligence step was a requirement for the audit to be concluded and the report presented before payments were made to the applicants. The Minister of Finance participated in our first group meeting, and in fact, he convened this meeting on my request. And this was important because the minister's participation in the meeting aided in breaking down the barrier of change. And I say the barrier of change because this was the first time that SAI Jamaica had undertaken a real-time audit, and the first time that all the entities involved in the process would be subjected to a real-time audit. And the process was further exacerbated by the entire process being undertaken remotely, because this was during the COVID lockdown where there were restrictions and social distancing requirements. So consequently, it was essential that all agencies involved clearly understood their role and would be required to be also appreciative of the time sensitivities. It was particularly challenging for the developers, and this is the developers of the information system that would govern the payment of the stimulus, the disbursement of the stimulus payments, since the system was being reviewed by SAI Jamaica whilst in development stage. The audit was undertaken in 4 phases, and the first phase being our review of the application system through which the application would be accepted and processed. The other phases focused on due diligence processes and sought to obtain assurance that anti-fraud mechanisms were sufficiently robust to ensure that only intended beneficiaries received stimulus payments. So interestingly, my experience was that the minister was more welcoming of the audit process than some of the public officials. And as I indicated before, the real-time audit approach was new. So public officials saw our request for information at the time as an imposition and a distraction, because everyone was under pressure equally, I would admit. So some public officials were only stirred into action after the involvement of the minister. So we have since issued 3 reports pertaining to the COVID-19, and the general response was positive. Stakeholders were appreciative of the promptness of the report. Beyond that, we found that entities involved in the process became more appreciative of the audit because the review identified system weaknesses such as script errors and missing steps to check that the applicants met all the criteria, which in fact improved the application controls and prevented over and improper payments. So personally, it was good to report the amount of savings our audit achieved rather than reporting overpayments. So the audit of the relief program is now complete. The final report will be published soon. We have, as I said before, published 3 reports. However, our audit of the COVID-19 activities is ongoing for the Ministry of Health, and these audits though are not real time. But I do not anticipate that the continued audits will be met with any resistance. My view is that public officials have become more accustomed to audits undertaken by INTOSAI Jamaica. Thanks.
Wonderful, Ms. Manuela. Thank you so much. It's exciting to hear about the positive response that you're receiving, of course, ensuring value and ensuring that the intended beneficiaries are ultimately getting the services they need. So this is exactly what strengthening the audit and oversight ecosystem is about. And thanks so much. I'd now like to turn to Hanna Takkula, the member of the European Court of Auditors and former member of the European Parliament and Parliament of Finland. Again, we've talked a lot about the role of the legislature. The report itself highlights some of the challenges in terms of the accountability system. We'd love to hear from your experience, what are the most important factors that allow legislative committees to perform the oversight function well? And which capacities do you think members need to enable them to do so? So I'd love to hear from you on that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and good afternoon from Luxembourg, and thank you for organizing this seminar. First, I would like to point out that at the European Union level, we have 2 legislative authorities. In the other words, we have so-called co-decision mechanism. We have the European Parliament and we have the Council. The European Parliament has 705 members directly elected by the EU citizens, and the Council is composed of the representatives of the 27 EU member states governments. The European Parliament has the final say in the discharge procedure and the annual budget procedure, but in the other legislative issues, Parliament and Council have equal responsibility. But now to answer your question concretely. It is indeed challenging to make sure that legislators take our audit findings more seriously. As a former member of the European Parliament and of the Finnish National Parliament, I can admit that the audit reports are not always to hand or at the back of the minds when legislators draft new laws. This is especially the case in the final step of the procedure when compromises are discussed and many details have to be solved. As the question highlights, the challenges is even harder when the executive, which is the EU in the European Commission, is from the same political party as the most prominent legislator. In the EU, as you probably know, the President of Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, and the Commissioner responsible for the budget, Johannes Hahn, come from the European People's Party, EPP, which is the most prominent party in European Parliament. And also the chair of the Budgetary Control Committee of the European Parliament, Mrs. Hohlmeier, is from the EPP party also. There is an additional element which increases the challenges, that is when the executive tries sometimes very hard to influence the work of the auditor. I've seen that happening quite often during my 2.5 years here at the European Court of Auditors. We are, of course, an independent and impartial audit institution, but that does not stop the executive trying to soften our message before they are published and submitted to the legislature. This issue might also be a bit cultural nature. When I was a state auditor in the Finnish Parliament, and we issued our annual report to the executive, it was self-evident that the executive did not try to change or soften auditors' findings or recommendation. So coming back to the questions, how do we incentivize legislators to take audit reports more seriously? I would like to mention 3 points. Three points. Firstly, we have to make sure that our findings are clearly written and they are absolutely evidence-based. If we are unclear and vague, it makes the legislators' work much more difficult. If our reports are politically motivated, we lose our reputation immediately. Secondly, we have to have the timing right. If we are too late with our excellent findings, the findings are of course not very useful for the legislature. As we say, today's 3-star dinner will be tomorrow's waste. And thirdly, we need to have regular dialogue with legislators. Which audit topics are relevant for them, which areas need to cover in the next 12 months and so. So I think I will stop now here. This is my contribution for the moment, and thank you for your attention.
Great. No, thank you so much. Those important points about the evidence base and, of course, a regular dialogue, having very clear action plans and steps to follow. So, no, thank you so much. We'd now like to turn, we've heard some experience of a positive executive response, which is great. We've also seen some comments in the chat that, as the report highlighted, we need to work more on sort of the uptake of audits by various actors in the accountability system. We'd now like to turn to Dr. Hector Feliz, who will be speaking in Spanish, so feel free to use your audio if needed. Dr. Feliz, welcome. We understand that it can be challenging to follow up on audit reports. In your experience, how can these audit reports be made even more useful for agencies like the one you were in the Ministry of Health? What was your experience using and following up on audits? Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you a lot. Voy a hablar en español. I beg your pardon. Primero, agradecer la invitación para participar de esta reunión tan importante. Muchas gracias. Así que también fue la organización de Buenos Aires que me invitó.
And I am a specialist in the Chagas disease. And in 2008, the Ministry of Health of Argentina called upon me to be in charge of the Chagas disease program. Now, what is this disease? This is a very complex disease, and there are different actors involved. There's a vector, which is similar to a mosquito. And we find this in rural areas and poor areas. And they live in houses that are badly or poorly built. So it is disease that is associated with poverty. And what the WHO calls neglected diseases. In other words, governments are not addressing these diseases, and the pharmaceutical sector does not produce medicines for it. In 1970 to date, we have seen no new medicines invented to address this disease. So the WHO says that this is a neglected disease. And there are 20 of them which are on this list or in this category. In our country, while I was head of the national program, I went through an audit that was done by the National Audit Institution. It was a wonderful thing. They did a complete study of everything that was going on, the deficits, the benefits, etc. Now, in 2008, I no longer worked at the ministry. Then there was a new audit on the National Chagas program. And as I said, this is a very complex disease. And the results were exactly the same. There is no doubt that it was due to the negligence of those who were responsible for the economics. We had international funding at that time for this disease, and they were not used. These funds were not used appropriately. We had an important program based on that budget that we had. And when the budget had to be executed, the money did not appear. And unfortunately, this is the case of many Latin American countries. In other countries, when this happens, I've been in contact with other ministries in other countries. When this happened in 2012 and in 2018, we see the same difficulties and defects and little effectiveness. Those who are responsible are punished, they are sanctioned. In our country, nothing happened. The same reports which showed the defects or negligence, well, nothing was done about it. In our country, the health system is compartmentalized. It's in stovetops. We are a federal country. That means that the norms that come out of the ministry, every province executes them according to their own resolutions. Furthermore, our health system is even more fragmented. We have a public system. We have a completely private system for those who are wealthier, and workers have a social security system. Now, in our country, there are more than 200 health systems, which means that it is even more difficult to implement a national program. We had funds from the Fond Plata, that was the international budget, this to take action against the vectors that are responsible for propagating this disease. But unfortunately, we could not continue forward with this. Well, what could we do? And it's not easy, of course. There are many entities in the community which are trying to fight so that the government does what it says it will. There is a symmetry between those who are working at the ministry. Those of us working in the ministry wanted to take action, but the money coming from the decision makers did not trickle down. So this symmetry made for great difficulties. This disease is a disease that we call a silent disease because many years can go by without the patient having any symptoms, and it is silenced as well. What does that mean? In other words, the government does not do anything. So it is a silent disease and a disease silenced by authorities. The audit, what it does in our country, and it does something very good. It really assesses what the legislature is doing to supervise the public accounts. It verifies the legal and accounting rules. So the audits for countries are very good. They get to the Congress, but then nothing is done. Nothing is changed. So I think at this time, social agencies, public agencies, agencies that belong to the communities, NGOs, should actively work to do something about allocation of funds and the quality of the management of those who are responsible for the health systems, and try to train those in the public system and in the medical system so that action is taken for the good of our country. To conclude, the Chagas disease in our country affects 1 million people. And it is a disease that exists in Europe, the United States, and in the Americas, and 7 million people suffer from it in these regions. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Thank you so much. Again, a stark reminder of how important these issues are, that, you know, these are audits that are really addressing people's lives, and we need to take action on these audit recommendations to ensure that we deliver for our communities, and including those most vulnerable. Thank you so much, Dr. Riedich. I now would like to pass over to Jay Cruz from the Public Service Accountability Monitor in South Africa, who's of course been very active on using audits and engaging with the Supreme Audit Institution in South Africa. So Jay, again, we don't have too much time, but I want to make sure you can speak about how you and other civil society organizations are using audit reports, engaging broadly. We've heard in the comments today the importance of collaboration, of coalitions. How can we build new and expanded partnerships? So yeah, what can civil society do? And I maybe take this occasion to ask how we can strengthen opportunities for public participation in the audit process, particularly at challenging times like now. Jay, over to you.
Thank you, Claire, and greetings to all. So I work for an organization, a civil society organization, that's been engaging and using audit information for 20 years. And examples that I'd like to share with those on the call include the following. So where your advocacy as a civil society organization takes the form of maybe a social audit or budget analysis, or you're engaged in media or parliamentary submissions, your advocacy can often be strongly supported or buttressed by audit report information and findings. Civil society calls for greater consequence management and corrective action against service providers and public servants implicated in maladministration can often be reinforced with reference to audit reports. In countries and contexts where civil society face significant threats to their advocacy, where their work is questioned, their credibility questioned, or their research disputed, using audit reports can be used to push back against such threats and reduce efforts to try and personalize advocacy asks made by civil society. Where audit reports show steady improvement in results that lead to improved service delivery and rights realization, they can be used by civil society in advocacy to then illustrate the various benefits that flow from strengthening these key accountability checks and balances. I'd also advocate for linking audit reports to the SDGs, and of course, show how these audit report findings contribute to or detract from progress in realizing SDGs. Another aspect is promoting public access to and visibility and understanding of audit reports and the findings that they arrive at. Educating and encouraging the public to draw on these reports to strengthen their engagement with governments and parliaments is a vital avenue. Another aspect I would highlight is emphasizing audit trends over a number of years and linking these trends to human rights realization, to economic, social, and covenant rights, to the OGP commitments, and to public service delivery. Insofar as what you can do to strengthen opportunities for public participation are concerned, particularly during the COVID pandemic, suggestions here are having a shared understanding are key components to helping overcome the challenges that we face in a pandemic such as this. Civil society are often well placed to advise Supreme Audit institutions where aspects of government and especially public service delivery are impacted or dysfunctional. Civil society are often approached by concerned or citizens or whistleblowers, and using this information in a responsible manner to inform advocacy concerned with addressing service delivery problems is but one aspect. The Auditor General of South Africa has shown a willingness to engage civil society in order to inform their audit plans and in order to better realize their mandate and to ensure that public funds reach those most in need, and that abuse and wastage of resources is reduced and addressed. Lastly, I'd say that Supreme Audit institutions should be engaged and encouraged to introduce and maintain mechanisms that promote public participation during the audit process. There are encouraging trends that can be shared and examples that are available. I'd be happy to discuss these with people that are interested. Again, another point I'd make in conclusion is drawing upon the open budget survey findings and now this most recently launched report and the IBP's call to open budgets will also support advocacy concerned with advancing public participation and strengthening the work of the Supreme Audit institutions. Thank you.
Wonderful, Jay. I wish we had all day together with the various speakers here to really unpack more of the audit and oversight ecosystem. I know it's been a short but rich time together. So thanks again, very important points about how we can have a common understanding of the findings and recommendations of audits, how we can use them together, how we can follow up together, how we can really strengthen participation throughout the audit process. We have a few minutes left. I see your comments. We are going to keep all the questions that we've received and we'll follow up. We'll also be sharing the presentation. We'll be sharing the recording. But now I'd like to pass over to Einar for some synthesis and closing reflections. And thanks all to everyone for participating. So Einar, over to you, please. Oh, sorry, Einar, we're not able to hear you. Sorry about that.
I can hear you. I could hear Einar.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, please go ahead. It must be on my end. Sorry, go ahead.
No, thank you, Claire, for moderating the event and also to the different speakers for very insightful comments. We're running behind schedule, so I'm going to be much quicker in my summary than I planned to be. I think it's important to start with the notion that auditing is not an end in itself. I mean, if SEIs are really going to deliver value and have impact, it also means that the audit recommendations need to be followed up, implemented, leading to a better world, basically. And to do that, I think you need this whole ecosystem in place in terms of different actors. Of course, the SEIs can, in some ways, also impact the ecosystem itself, but you need this ecosystem in place. And that is also why this report is so concerning, because it really raises some of fundamental questions on a number of domains. The scores are not great all along, but particularly when it comes to sort of public participation in the audit process and executive follow-up, combined with what Ed mentioned in terms of independence, it really paints a concerning picture that we need to address together. In terms of some of the interventions today, I think Ed sort of, in a way, sort of challenged the SEI community a little bit in terms of moving away from being inward-looking organizations to outward-looking organizations that actually work together with different actors in different ways. It means working together with other sort of oversight institutions, with civil society, with the executive, and with parliaments. And to sort of become the organizations that we really expect the SEIs to be in, also in light of the SDGs and being open and transparent institutions. I think it was very interesting also to hear about the different perspectives when it comes to civil society organizations and how that work can be enhanced. Ed again sort of promoted it, but said that there are also concerns that need to be addressed, to have proper safeguards, proper engagements and processes in place. And I think Jay very much highlighted both how the cooperation between the SEIs and civil society organizations can benefit both parties. SEIs can get information, they can also get protection for the independence, etc. And the CSOs can actually use the audit reports proactively in their work. Pamela spoke very well about sort of the positive aspects of SEI working with executive with the COVID-19 audits, which really showed engagement from the Ministry of Finance and personal involvement. And it was a really good example on how SEIs and the executive can work together for the better good. But we also, in the Argentina example, heard how nothing had changed in 10 years, really showing the problems when the audit recommendations are not followed up. So it's a very interesting, I think, to see the different norms that are being followed. I also thought Hannu raised a very important point in terms of how SEIs can enhance their cooperation with parliaments. in terms of and I think Pam touched upon that as well, in terms of sort of having reports that are understandable, that are timely, and that there is constant dialogue. So just to sort of sum up altogether, I think we should indeed be very concerned by the findings of the publication, and also recognize the mutual dependence between the different actors in the oversight ecosystem, be it the mutual benefits of a closer collaboration between SEIs and civil society, between the SEIs and Parliament, between SEIs and other control agencies, and with the executive. And also that enhanced collaboration now during COVID-19 and the new normal is more critical than ever. I think we've heard some very good examples of how we can work together, but also some of the challenges that we are facing. And as institutions and organizations working towards a common goal and recognizing that the challenges at hand, I think it's more vital than ever that these interlinkages are strengthened going forwards. And no more than ever, indeed, do we need all hands on deck to ensure strength and accountability globally and to overcome the barriers that we are facing. So that's just a quick synthesis from my end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm sorry again about the time, but it's been a very rich discussion. Again, on behalf of the International Budget Partnership, the INTOSAI Development Initiative, and the World Bank, we're delighted that we had this conversation today. We're keen to continue the discussion. We welcome again you to share your questions, your comments, your experiences. We'll try to continue the discussion over Twitter as well. Feel free to use the hashtag #OpenBudgets, but we'll certainly follow up on your questions and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you so much. Wishing you a great evening and day and morning. Thanks so much.